Good evening and welcome to Monday live show here on the David Vance channel. Thank you so much for tuning in wherever you are. It's so terrible this, but I'd forgotten that we're actually streaming this everywhere. I see we're over on, I see you on YouTube. We're on YouTube's. We're on the anti-free speech platform, YouTube and Facebook, and then we're on all the free speech channels as well. So yes, hi Leslie, hi Dee. We're on Getter, Rumble, Twitter, Odyssey, DLive, blah blah blah. We're on so many platforms, but it's okay because this is where we can't annoy YouTube. I don't think tonight, but maybe our guests can prove me wrong if we go against their climate orthodoxy. But anyway, we'll get into that in a second. So thank you very much for coming along. And before we get into the main meat of the show, we just have a few bits to go through. So first of all, just to bring you up our sponsor, Quantum Hypno, who are kind enough to sponsor this show. And we'll just very quickly play Quantum Hypno's ad.
Quantum Hypno is a transformative approach that connects with the superconscious through the power of hypnosis. I take the time to get to know you and create a relaxed setting where you can share your life story. There's no rush or time pressure involved. During the hypnosis session, you'll experience a natural and profound connection with the superconscious, accessing healing, wisdom, and the answers that you've been seeking throughout your life. Envision the ability to travel through time and space, recovering lost knowledge and exploring the universe. This life-changing work has already helped thousands of people dealing with addictions, trauma, or a sense of being lost, enabling them to move forward in the right direction. I've worked with people from all walks of life, so what are you waiting for?
Who can say it's not just lions can do that? Dee says, I don't think hypnosis would work in me. Who can say? Who can say? Anyway, check out Quantum Hypno. They're kind enough to support me, so I like to support them. Right, that's out of the way. Second thing, very quickly, to remind you all, folks, that our next big live event is happening in London on 1st of March with Lawrence Fox, who I've just been speaking to on a Twitter space, and Calvin Robinson. And hope you may be able to come along and meet us and enjoy the chat. We're going to be talking about free speech in an age of censorship, which couldn't be a more appropriate topic, I don't think, anyway. Well, one of the most appropriate topics. So yes, Leslie, I know you're coming to see us, so that'll be great. But just everyone anyway, the links are attached. If you want to get yourself a ticket, come along and see us. And 1st of March. London town, bring your own stab vest. Right then, okay, without further ado, he's been sitting very patiently in the background as I've been going through the mantra that starts these things. So anyway, without our special guest, he's been with us before. I'm sure you'll recognize him immediately. And his name is, of course, Dr. Niall McCrae. Niall, good evening.
Good evening, David. Great to be back on again.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. It's always a good start to the new year to get smashing people like you coming on. And, the funny thing is, I mean, we have talked about a lot of stuff, I suppose, over the years now. But there's still a great relevance and urgency in some of the topics that we do cover here. And in particular regard, the reason I'm so keen to chat to yourself, and the timing's really good in this one, is two things are happening. Number one, Niall's just brought out a great new book, which we're going to bring up right now. He says, there we go, Green in Tooth and Claw, the Misanthropic Mission of Climate Alarm. Try saying that after a few drinks. But anyway, that's the title of the book. And it's a must-read book. You can go and pick up your own copy about it. But I think, as we were saying, Niall, just before we came on air, we all know that this climate thing is a scam. But I'm not sure people fully understand how lethal it is. And that links into something that's going on right now as you and I are sitting here, or the monsters over in Davos have been having a fun time. And it kind of links together, doesn't it? So talk us through how you see it.
Yeah, well, it's a good point you just made a few moments ago, David, that although people are critical, skeptical about the notion of a climate emergency, not many of them realize why this is being done, why this is being sort of indoctrinated into society. So it's not enough for us just to doubt whether there really is a climate crisis.
Yeah.
We need to do much more about that. And those of us who are kind of more awake to the globalist agenda, we really are in a race against time to spread the word. And I do hope that my book makes some contribution to this, because it's not exaggerating, David, to say that this is a battle between humanity and an evil masterclass that wants to impoverish and enslave us.
Yeah, and again, a core point that you make in this, and you sort of trace the history of it really well. That the whole depopulation agenda. You see, I don't think enough people fully understand. Normies don't fully understand this at all, and even some of the more awakened don't necessarily fully get it. That as I think that picture you've got up on the front of your cover of your book, we are the carbon that they want to, you are the carbon they want to reduce. But just think about that. Tell us what that really means, and what they really want to happen to us.
I think the best way of answering that, David, is to just and very briefly go back to where this ecological doom began.
Yep.
And I think that there's a tendency for us in society generally to think of the climate crisis as a fairly recent thing. This whole green agenda as being something progressive and really just got going in the last 20 to 30 years, but in fact it's been much longer in incubation. And I think a very key moment in human history was Charles Darwin's evolution of the species. And again, it's like people tend to just think about the book or the event or what somebody says in isolation without thinking about why that happened at a particular time.
Yeah.
So Darwin's theory came out at a time when the ruling classes were beginning to get quite worried about this burgeoning working class population, which of course they needed for the factories to produce things and to enrich, the ruling classes. But the sheer size and population surge in that layer of society was beginning to trouble the establishment of the time. And I think Charles Darwin's theory served a purpose there. From Darwin's theory, we then went into a phase called social Darwinism in the so it's like high Victorian. And the concern was that while nature has a kind of principle of survival of the fittest, what was happening in industrialized nations like Britain was that there was more and more welfare services. I mean, nothing compared to what there is now, but back then, you had the start of the whole hospitals, education, all this sort of thing, and clamour for more and more of this. And the fear was that this was creating survival of the unfittest. And then Charles Darwin's close relation, Francis Galton, founded the Eugenics Society.
Yeah.
And eugenics was huge. Going into the 20th century, all of the intelligentsia were into eugenics, the political leaders, the literary class. George Bernard Shaw, the Irish playwright.
Yeah, that's right.
He proposed back in around 1908 gas chambers for the weak and undesirable elements of society. And I believe that the First World War, which has never really been adequately explained, all that stuff about Archduke Ferdinand being shot in Serbia, and then millions and millions of young men lost their lives in the trenches on the Western Front. It doesn't really add up, does it? But I believe that was a eugenics act, the First World War.
Sorry, just to say, I think it was a planned blood. I think it was a planned blood sacrifice. That's what I think it was, done by these evil people. But it's fascinating. Carry on. That's really interesting. Yeah.
Yes, but I suppose the problem was that although the war was, sheer carnage, wasn't it? The Great War, as they called it at the time.
Okay.
Population bounced back pretty quickly in Britain and Germany and France. I mean, you got to remember back in those days, women were still having 4, 5, 6 children or more. Yeah. So population bounced back.
Yeah.
But there was an important development in the interwar years, which was sterilization. So it'd been talked about for a while. I mean, it was one of the objectives of eugenics was that stop procreation of tainted stock, but the problem is it's a slippery slope and a thin end of the wedge, isn't it? That once they start allowing sterilization for people with severe mental handicap, then it becomes people with kind of borderline, what they called moral defectives at the time, people with mental disorder, and then it just keeps expanding. In the same way that I think the public is being lured into supporting euthanasia now, assisted dying, thinking that it will just be for people with rare neurological syndromes. No, Canada had 10,500 people died through assisted suicide last year, and the number is just going up and up and up. And almost anyone will be able to get it or have it done to them. And so sterilization was going that way. And the Nazis, they weren't the inventors of this by any means. They just carried on where the Americans had started. And they, emptied their psychiatric institutions and their mental handicap colonies. And then, of course, eugenics got a very bad name because the Nazis practiced racial hygiene and persecuted the Jews and the gypsies and so on. Yep. So they couldn't carry on with eugenics the way they had in the first half of the 20th century. So they had to rebrand it. And they rebranded it in the color green. They invented an ecological catastrophe that humankind was heading towards. This was all neo-Malthusian. Thomas Malthus was the late 18th century Englishman who said that the population rises, but on a level completely, it's a geometric kind of scale, whereas there's a sort of logarithmic increase in sorry, got that wrong way around. The geometric increase in our ability to produce food, but a logarithmic increase in population. Of course, that's unsustainable. But Malthus's ideas was quashed and ridiculed really over time. But they're reinvented in 1968.
That's now, big year.
Yeah, now 1968 is a key year, and again, David, it's just worth making this point, and I try to emphasize this in the book, is that this green ideology is nowhere near as new as people think. This has been planned and it's been going on for a long time, but it was only by 1968 that the people who are driving this, let's just call them globalists for now, right? The sort of Davos set of the time.
This
is like the Rockefellers and so on. Bill Gates's father, he was involved in all this
He
too.
was, yep, there's a surprise. Yep.
Yeah, it runs in the family, all this stuff.
It absolutely does. Yeah, but keep going.
Yeah. So 1968 is kind of popularly known as a year of sort of revolutionary spirit. It's like the kind of disciplined order of the after the Second World War in the 1950s. Young people were restless and wanted change. And you had the civil rights movement in the US, that you had the ascent of, I think, second wave feminism and student riots in Paris. And that's what 1968 is known for. But those things were almost like staged for us, so that's what we would remember the 60s for. But really, the key events of 1968 are not taught. There'll be hardly any children, school kids will know about this, even university students. The two key things that happened in 1968 was, firstly, Paul Ehrlich's book, The Population Bomb, which was quite shocking for anyone who read it, because it was kind of going against what seemed to be the reality, that birth rates were falling and that Western populations were stabilizing, if not starting to even head downwards. He was saying that, that there was a population crisis. But secondly, he was saying that this is such an imminent disaster that in 20 years' time, there'll be no food. Now, that kind of tactic has been used by, globalists over and over again. I mean, you remember the Al Gore's book, The Inconvenient Truth.
Yeah, I do.
Which was predicting again in 20 years' time that these terrible things would happen. All of the ice would melt in the Arctic and so on.
Yeah,
didn't happen, but they're never really sort of confronted with that 20 years on, are they? They just carry on with some new predictions.
It's always a hit and run. I remember, Neil, the BBC paying me to go and watch the movie An Inconvenient Truth. They probably regretted it, because
and what did you think at the time, David?
I thought it was maybe there's a recording of me basically slating it. I thought it was hysterical nonsense from start to finish. But you make a really great point, and it's true of all these things. They have their hit pieces, the cycle moves on, people forget, and it's kind of vaguely just taken as well. Al Gore did warn us about this, and back in 68, but then in a few years later we had the Ice Age, didn't we? I remember as a child being frightened about, oh my God, the Ice Age is coming, this is really bad. And that was the early 70s, I think.
Well, again, I think that was a psyop, David, because but in 1968 the other thing that happened was the Club of Rome was founded on the Rockefeller estate in Italy.
Yeah, there's a surprise. Yeah,
hardly anyone's heard of this organization.
Club of Rome.
If you look at the Davos shindig, everyone knows. Most people know about the World Economic Forum, don't they?
Yes.
Because they have deliberately publicized themselves. But often these globalist groups, they work by stealth and in the background.
Yes.
Now, the Club of Rome had incredible influence on the United Nations, and the United Nations agenda became completely driven by this ecological urgency, and that led to the Rio summit, where all these countries, all these political leaders signed up to these targets for 20, 30, 50 years ahead. Probably didn't think, most of them, what they were signing up to. And the ratchet keeps on tightening. But I think the point I just want to emphasize, David, is that we're well aware of things like net zero. We're well aware of these protesters, Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil. We're well aware of Greta Thunberg. We're well aware of Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, and all kinds of other things that are happening now. But what people need to understand is where this all came from and where it's going. It's got nothing to do with science. It's got nothing to do with concern for nature. This is a project to create a two-tier society with a large mass of the sort of lesser mortals, lorded over by a new nobility, which would be a predatory class. And when they talk about saving the planet, David, what they really mean is saving it for themselves. That is the countryside, holidays, beef, fish, being able to move around, driving cars and things, all the things that we can do now and are taken for granted and are gradually being taken away from us. They won't be removed from people altogether because the elite will continue to do these things.
Yeah. But do you think people have kind of, you mentioned the World Economic Forum. I mean, there's lots of sort of, maybe though we have to be careful because we're all in our own little echo chambers. Everyone talks about all the private jets going to Davos, the hypocrisy. But do you think normies see it like that, or do they see something different? What do they see, do you think?
Yeah, no, it's a good point, David, that, you know, perhaps I should put a caveat on what I said a few moments ago, that everyone knows about the World Economic Forum. Actually, that's not true, is it? I mean, probably most normies have heard very little about the World Economic Forum. They probably don't really know much about Davos because any media coverage is controlled. Right. Now, the World Economic Forum, which started as a European Management Forum by Klaus Schwab with help from Prince Charles at the time, back in 1971, that group remained in the shadows until really sort of late 90s when its big Davos conferences started to get sort of publicized quite widely. But that was unusual for a globalist organization, for any organization which is pushing for what we might call a new world order. Usually these groups remain kind of out of media attention. The Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, and so on. So they took the decision that they needed, one of these groups needed to be out there publicizing itself, and there's pros and cons with that. And a pro is that you know, you can have much more publicity and much more marketing for the things that you want to do. But the downside, and we're starting to see more of the downside with Davos, is it's becoming a little bit of an embarrassment, isn't it? To you know, I think any politician or celebrity that goes to Davos is going to get questioned a little bit when they come back. They put themselves in the firing line when they do that. Although, isn't it interesting? Like, you know, you talk about King Charles, or Prince Charles as he was back then. He was there at the beginnings of all of this back in the early 70s, encouraging such like, and here we are now, you know, all these sort of, what is it, almost 50 years later or whatever. And it's King Charles, he's still up to his neck in it, isn't he? Well, the same people that were driving eugenics in the late 19th century are the people that are running the green agenda today. So it's British aristocracy, the kind of deep statists of Washington, the Vatican, you know, basically any powerful organization is very involved in this project. And just as in the late 19th, early 20th century, celebrities were of the time, but it was use that word celebrity back then, but literary figures and so on, they were all into eugenics, and now you've got celebrities that are all into the green movement, so I think it's really the same sort of people that are pushing this agenda now, as we're pushing eugenics 100 years ago.
Yeah, it's as you said earlier, it's the predator class, and they never really change from generation to generation. And you could argue they go back a long time into history, some of these families and so on and so forth, in terms of their history. But we're living in the here and now, and like one of the things, like for example, World Economic Forum. I listened to was it Noah Yuval Harari, and do you think is he set up to be this kind of like, I don't know, court jester to Klaus Schwab? He comes out with these transhumanist, outrageous stuff, and do you think he means it? How do you interpret people like Harari?
Yeah, well, there's a line that if you want to know who's got the power, just see who you're allowed to criticize. And a sort of line similar to that of mine is, if you want to know what the narrative is, see what books are on sale in Waterstones.
Absolutely. Right? Great point. Yeah.
So in Waterstones, you always get a little pile at the desk of, well, you used to, I haven't been there for a while, Greta Thunberg's little book, But if you look at the more sort of serious authors that they promote, Yuval Noah Harari, all of his books are still, and I was in a bookshop the other day, and still on the kind of recommended, that table they have near the entrance of the bookshop.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Laid out these important books that you ought to read, and Yuval Noah Harari's books were there, and these were, this weren't new books, but these books he wrote 2, 3, 4 years ago. So they're really pushing it.
It's interesting that, because funny enough, there's a new Waterstones opened very close to where I live, and I was in it, and I can't bear it. I can't bear to go in there, because I know I'm being psyoped from the minute I walk through the door. Especially when it comes to issues like history and whatnot. I just can't stand it anymore. I'm all for.
It's awful, isn't it? Yeah,
it is. Yeah.
Yuval Noah Harari. Mentioning him is helpful, because I haven't really explained the link between the green ideology of today and how they're trying to depopulate the earth. And Yuval Noah Harari has talked about useless eaters, and he had that very candid discussion I think it's been taken down from YouTube, where he was talking openly about what should we do with the useless eaters, and you can see what he really thinks. But he says, maybe we should just give them video games, just like a temporary thing we can occupy them with. But that is very much the thinking. And going back to the royal family, I always had a fondness for Prince Philip. I just, what was called gaffes were actually, I thought, some very sharp and humorous comments. But I mean, the man was a pure eugenicist. I mean, and he came out with this line once that he'd like to come back. If he's reincarnated, he'd like to come back as a virus and wipe out most of humanity. And that kind of thinking, and Yuval Noah Harari's thinking, are it very much in accord with Paul Ehrlich's The Population Bomb, and with something I'm sure many of your viewers will have heard of, which is the Georgia Guidestones.
Yes. Yep.
Now, the Georgia Guidestones is like a secular version of the 10 Commandments. And in my book, there's a chapter called The Secular Vatican, because what they've done is they've created this new, it's almost like a religion. And there are many things that they do which they've sort of borrowed from the Bible, and mostly from sort of Christian or Judaism. And the 10 Commandments of the Georgia Guidestones, one of them was that the population of the world should be held at no more than 500 million. Well, that's a lot of people to eradicate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Georgia Guidestones were destroyed.
Blowing up.
About 2 years ago, weren't they?
Yeah, I do. I do remember
Too many people waking up and seeing this, and it was just horrendous that stood for all those years. This idea that we need to extinguish 7/8 of the world population.
Do you think they deliberately blew the Georgia stones up? Do you think?
Oh, I believe so. Yes. Yeah.
Too awkward. Yeah. I see a few people have said, because you were mentioning Prince Philip and whatnot. I see a few people also mentioning in the chat, don't forget Stanley Johnson, also another avowed eugenicist. I mean, they're all there. I wonder, does Boris have similar views?
Well, he's bound to, and I've got some of these rogues appear in the book, and often it is a case of like father, like son. You've got Justin Trudeau, his father, well, his official father, Pierre Trudeau. He was very into the sort of technocratic agenda. Now, the importance of technocracy here. Can't go afford to miss this point, which is that technocracy was a concept that came about after the First World War, when there was tremendous advance in technology. War is the mother of invention, isn't it? And
yes.
And there was a sense that with advancing technology, the people in power would be able to organize society much more efficiently. And there was a group that started in America called Technocracy Incorporated, and all these like scientists. It was kind of like a World Economic Forum of the day. And they wanted what they called a North American technate, which would be like Canada, US, and Mexico. The three countries together would come together as a sort of massive experiment in total control of population resources using technological means. And so this idea of technocracy is really what the World Economic Forum and other groups like the Trilateral Commission were started to work towards, because although they're using all this stuff about the climate crisis, they don't really believe any of that stuff. What they're working towards is total control of population and resources, and the green agenda gives them the justification to do that, to take away people's freedoms, to take away people's rights, and to reduce our consumption and access to things that we grew up taking for granted.
I mean, they are monstrous. I mean, even, the fact that, as you referenced earlier, I mean, they want to, for example, almost eliminate our consumption of things like beef and whatnot, and substitute some nice meal, nice juicy mealworms or locusts or whatever. I mean, it's funny at one level, but horrific at another level. That how could they even think like that? But that's what they are, Neil. That's the point. These people, they do see us as, or the vast majority of us, as useless eaters, not fit to have steaks and whatnot. No, bugs will do for us.
And it does them well to have pantomime villains. I mean, it'd be hard to think of a more perfect sort of James Bond baddie figure than Klaus Schwab. And you mentioned Yuval Noah Harari as well. I mean, these people look evil.
They do.
And so they look so bad that they're good. We can laugh about them.
Yes.
But really, they're not the people that are making the decisions.
Yeah.
And this is a difficulty we have. I mean, when we're talking about the New World Order and what these plans are for our for this totalitarianism that is becoming more and more evident as each year goes by. But who is actually running the show? And this is a difficulty we're in. So we already look like conspiracy theorists or cranks by talking about the New World Order. But we can't name who's doing this because we're not allowed to know. And people like Klaus Schwab and Tony Blair and George Soros and Bill Gates, I mean, these people are not the ones making the decisions. They're not at the top of the pyramid. So it's a bit like, I mean, I mentioned Freemasonry in the book because it's a bit like Freemasonry in that it's very secretive.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think I've always felt that the likes of Schwab and the rest of all the in fact, all the public ones, they're more the marionettes being put on stage for the spotlight to hit them. But the really evil people, the really bad ones, that they're way in the background. And as you say, we don't know who they are, but we kind of know what they want to do. Like, again, I see comments here, but people have been talking about farming, and we see the German farmers rising up against the German government. We've seen the Dutch, but that's because governments are at this point in the game, I think they want to starve us if they can. They want to cut off the food or disrupt the food supply anyway. They want to make farmers basically criminals. And like, again, you think about that, Neil, and you think, well, it wouldn't take too much to just topple over food supply. And then actually they could cause forms of starvation in the first world. It's kind of shocking. What do you make of this whole thing about wanting to stop us eating the things the nutritious foods that we have? And secondly, what do you think of the farmers in terms of their response to it?
Yes, we can never underestimate the value of a crisis. So people are only sort of half aware of what's going on. They'll often say things like, wait till this happens or wait till that happens, then they'll see. No, they want the crisis. Because the crisis gives the problem reaction solution mechanism.
Yes.
Which is well tried and tested in the globalist way of doing things. I mean, in the book, I've got 2 or 3 pages on what happened in Sri Lanka. I don't know if you remember that, David, about 2 years ago.
Yes.
And that was a classic case of problem, reaction, solution. There are some serious riots there. And I guess the trouble with very serious riots is that even the people in power are taking a big risk because things can get completely out of control. But they did just about keep the lid on it. And then they used those riots as a reason to do the thing that they wanted to do all along, which was to bring in digital ID and a rationing system. And that's what Sri Lankans are now living with, probably ad infinitum.
As you say, control is the end game, isn't it? That's where this ends. They have a complete control, and that's where things like digital currencies and whatnot come in, because obviously the central bank digital currencies is an important element in this. Basically, making sure that to save the planet, we have to have these, so we can't travel. EVs. I mean, what do you reckon to EVs? My new theory is that EVs have been designed. They were never going to work. I mean, clearly not, and clearly we know they're disastrous for the environment. But I think they know EVs would never work. This is all about they just want to stop us driving. I think. They take away our freedom.
You're right, David, because you are very switched on, right? But a lot of people who are criticizing the sort of green agenda have been, talking about electric cars, or they're never going to work, and that at some point they'll realize and go back to the drawing board. No, again, they want the crisis, and the purpose of electric cars is exactly as you put it, David. It's to stop people from driving, right? And there's a guy called, some of your viewers may know of him. He runs a really good YouTube channel, a guy called Jeff. Jeff buys cars. Do you know this chap?
He's been on with me multiple times. A good friend of Jeff's, and Jeff.
Good. Well, just today, just today, David, Jeff had the honesty to come out and say, I got it completely wrong on electric cars. He said, what I was doing was playing their game.
That's right. He was.
I was criticizing electric cars, saying how the batteries don't last, and you know, in freezing weather you can't recharge at the you know, and all this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And now he said that he just today he said, I realize I've been played all along, and that electric cars were never meant to work. They are nothing but a device.
That's right.
To stop people from driving and to take away our freedom of movement.
Yep. He actually contacted me yesterday. He wants to come on and do one of these because, as you said, but I mean, it's an interesting journey because Jeff, you know, pretty much you know, a petrol head, really into his cars, and he's a very nice bloke as well. He does these shows. He goes to this local pub, sits and talks to me, so it's great. But he's recognised, yes, that very point, Neil, that the narrative. You know, they need to improve these electric cars, better batteries, better. No, that's not the point. You don't have to worry about electric cars because you're not going to be in them, because you're not going to be driving, because you're going to be staying at home in your little 15-minute control zone.
And the planning for this is you know, sort of things that you and I couldn't spend enough hours of the day trying to work out the things that they've worked out for us. So they know that the car industry is going to wither away to nothing because obviously you know, that government policies will prohibit manufacture of petrol and diesel cars in the next 10 to 20 years, maybe less. Electric cars, people won't be buying them, and so you're going to have all these workforce, because it's still quite considerable workforce in the car industry, even in the UK, which you know, when you think after British Leyland all died, well, no, it didn't, because you've got lots of foreign companies that have got factories in the UK, like Nissan in Sunderland, for example. You know, so it's still quite a big employer in the UK and certainly in Germany. And what's going to happen to all these jobs? Well, this is great for the globalists, because there's nothing they like better than having, you know, all these workers who can be switched from doing something they don't want them making into something they do want them making.
Well,
you see, so and I think one possibility is that so there will still be movement, there will still be cars, but I think the future, as the globalists are designing it, is that there'll be fleets of electric cars on a sort of Uber-style system. No one will have cars in their driveways, apart from the rich.
Yeah.
Right, in their gated residences, but ordinary people, there'll no longer be cars on driveways. But you know, you want to go somewhere and you ring, and it will be quite possibly a driverless vehicle, electric, limited range. You'll be able to go, you know, to the hospital, for example, and you'd be sharing that car with maybe some other people who are going in the same direction.
Yeah, you see, this is where it is a fundamental attack on our freedom. The car arguably was one of the biggest drivers of freedom, especially in the United States. I mean, you know, obviously Henry Ford and all of that, and it's synonymous with freedom. You jump in your car, you go where you want. That's not the agenda. Like that, they want to stop that. And actually, when you get to that realization point that Jeff's got to, and where you and I are obviously at as well, everything then makes sense. You know, the fact there's no charge infrastructure. Well, of course, there's no charge. I mean, in Northern Ireland, I can tell you, I mean, there's no more than about a couple of dozen charge points. That's about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I went up to my parents in the west of Scotland, and I'm now on the south coast in Sussex. So that's, I think it's about 530 miles now.
Journey, yeah.
So if I was doing that by electric vehicle, it would take me a long time, even if I was paying the extra, because you've got these like superchargers in the service stations that can do a very rapid charge. I think it's still an hour or so. So I'd probably have to do that probably, what, 3 times, 4 times to make that journey each way.
It's discouraging you. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's all designed to encourage you not to do it. Basically, they don't want us traveling. But going back to what the globalists want, like another thing came into my head was last week, Neil, we saw the announcement by Tata Steel that they were closing. They were getting rid of 3,000 odd jobs down in Port Talbot in South Wales, and part of that was about helping, moving towards net zero, which is so laughable because obviously that's all going to be exported back to India. The emissions go up in India, but the British government, they're going along with it. I mean, the British government want net zero. I've said, right, I'll put the question to you: net zero and a functioning industrial base, they're mutually exclusive. You can have one, you can have the other. But if you don't have an industrial base, what have you got, Neil?
Yeah. Well, I think what any potential buyers of my book need to know is that there's no scientific graphs or tables in that book. There's no scientific argument about whether or not there's a climate crisis. I come from the position, I start from the premise that this is nothing to do with the climate or saving nature or anything beneficial for the majority of humankind or the planet. But obviously there are many books and many very skilled, cogent scientists who have debunked the climate crisis, and the idea of net zero it's pseudoscientific nonsense. It's like Trofim Lysenko in the Soviet Union, Stalin's barefoot scientist. There's no scientific basis to it at all. Carbon dioxide is a gas of life.
Right.
But what you've got happening up and down the country, David, and all Western countries, is national governments and local governments and schools and universities and every institution working towards net zero. They all have policies about net zero, and it's complete bunkum. But they've created this as it's a heresy to challenge any of this, because this really is like, a secular religion now,
belief system,
run by a secular Vatican, and you're not allowed to question it. It's interesting how, on YouTube, we're still allowed to, there's lots of things we're not allowed to discuss on YouTube. But we are allowed to discuss the climate crisis. But I think that even that, I think there'll be a lot more censorship coming in, because too many people are waking up. People don't look out their window and see a climate emergency. They don't feel the global boiling that the UN chief Antonio Guterres said, that we've now entered this era of global boiling. I mean, I don't know about you, David, but I'm a bit chilly here in my study.
No, there's not a lot. I agree. But do you think they do that to laugh at us and to mock us? Like, for example, just very quickly, they said 1st of January that the looking back in 2023, where I live here in Northern Ireland, it was the hottest year on record and the warmest year on record. And the BBC, just specifically on the BBC, they illustrated that by a picture of a field in June. They chose very carefully. And it was a lovely warm day. They didn't mention July was a washout, August was a washout. The rest of the year was pretty much wet and miserable as well. So it's like people are being asked to disbelieve the evidence of their own eyes. We know it's not boiling. It's but they're telling us it is. And is that to mock us, or are they so contemptuous of us? How do you explain them, like Guterres saying that kind of stuff, or is he just an idiot?
Yeah, a good question. I believe that much of the messaging that comes from the globalists, and I'm using the term globalist, it's not quite right, but people know what I mean.
Yeah.
It has a dual purpose. And you saw this with the messaging around COVID and other things like Ukraine. So the people in power know that there are 10, 15, 20% of people who are awake or a bit skeptical about the messaging, right? But they also know that 70 to 80% majority will lap up what they're told. That they know that there's still 70, 80% who, even though there's fewer people watching BBC News now, there's fewer people buying newspapers, they know that most people still believe that there's something called the news.
Yes.
And that people don't think of the news as being a staged, curated set of messages to control their behavior. They think this is an objective account of what's going on in the world, because that's the way that normies think, that non-critical thinkers see the world. So I think that what happens with the messaging, David, is that they think about how the normies will take the message, and by and large, that's that the normies will just believe what they're told. But then they also have to think about how the 15% or so critical thinkers will take the message. And they know that the critical thinkers are not going to believe what they say. So what they do is they use that opportunity to mock them. And mockery is very powerful, because what they're doing by mocking people is they're contributing to demoralization. And demoralization weakens people. And people who know that there's no climate crisis, right? But all these things are being done to them. They're being charged to drive on the roads of London, for example. They're being taxed to the hilt. They're having things taken away. And they know it's wrong. They know that there's no good reason. Their councils are going bust, David.
I know.
While enforcing this net zero policies, people know critical thinkers know it's not right. And this has a very demoralizing effect. It makes people really feel that there's no purpose to their existence. Now, actually, I think that sounds like a very pessimistic thing to say. Actually, I think that something that goes part and parcel being a critical thinker is that you've got resilience. And therefore, people who are being the targets of this mockery and demoralization strategy are actually fairly good at dealing with it. I mean,
we double down. All we do is we double down. We meme them. We mock them more than they can ever mock us. And resilience is a great word, because that's what's so. We saw certainly starting in 2020 as people became much more aware and much more resistant. And it's interesting, because I think there is a bit of a coalescence. People saw through, let's call it euphemistically, because we're on YouTube, COVID, Ukraine, people have seen through. We do see through an awful lot of the stuff that they pull on us, but they are ruthless, Neil, aren't they? Like people need to understand they're absolutely ruthless. They have no problems, if they could, wiping out half of humanity. In fact, that's probably what they want to do, or more.
And that ruthlessness has always been there. And, the First World War was, I think, a ruthless eradication of working class men. It was a means of the ruling class suppressing what was a burgeoning labor movement, which was becoming too much of a threat. So they will use war. War is always a very good instrument for them to use. But another thing that I've done, and I sort of talk about this more in the book, is the UN Agenda 21.
Yep.
Has these 17 sustainable goals. And what I've done is I've kind of relabeled them as 17 methods of depopulation. And actually, there's a lot more than 17, but I've just chosen 17 things like really promoting abortion, transgenderism, hormones in the water supply. War, of course, is one that they've used many times over the decades. But so many things that they do, which, you know, almost anything actually that you see that trends in how modern society has emerged. It's been informed by the depopulation agenda. You know, how can they reduce the birth rate? How can they increase the death rate? I mean, what is the clamour for euthanasia other than increasing the death rate?
And yet we have people, much loved public figures like Esther Ranson, for example, who's been to the fore. And I mean, they choose their figureheads very, very carefully. And you mentioned, obviously, Canada, and I agree, it's horrific. I mean, I would dread to go to Canada because I think if I coughed, someone might turn around and say to me, David, have you considered, a planned exit from this planet? The death... they are death cultists, aren't they? Across the piece, it's whatever ways they want us dead, but we're still very much alive and kicking. How do you think this one's going to ultimately play out, Neil? There's the $64 million question. Tell me that.
Yes, well, that is the really big question. I'm not sure I can answer that very absolutely, but I would say that at the start of the book, I begin the book in Oxford, where there was a rally against the Oxford City Council closing off all these roads, and it was seen as so I think it was going to become a 15-minute city. There's so many of these schemes, isn't there? So many labels. I think that was what that was going to be.
Yeah,
and still will be. I mean, we had this big rally there. And the rally was smeared as far-right conspiracy theorists, extremists, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I remember being there in this rally where I'd sort of gone, 60, 70 miles to attend this rally in this small city, and thousands of people there. And I just remember taking in this atmosphere about, all these people know that what's going on is wrong. But how much chance have we got of actually stopping it? And I know it sounds a bit cliche, but the only way that we can hope to stop it or to mitigate it is to wake as many people around us up as we can.
Yeah.
So, we're the critical thinkers, but we're not really a critical mass, if you like. There's not enough of us for governments to be worried about. I mean, on things like Ukraine and COVID and climate change and maybe Gaza, Israel and transgender, look, MPs are well used to getting letters from critical thinkers among their constituents about these things. Do they care? No, they don't, because our numbers are not enough.
No.
To create enough momentum for change. But we need to work on that, and we need to create an idea. We need to spread this idea around the population that the messages and the books and the media and everything that people are told that the establishment wants people to know, that is just an official narrative. When these people in the establishment talk about the problems of misinformation and disinformation, they, of course, are the biggest purveyors of misinformation and disinformation. But why are they doing it? It's because they only want their lies to be heard. They don't want the truth to be known.
Yeah, well, I thought it was telling that at the World Economic Forum and last week we had Ursula von der Leyen stand up and tell us that the two biggest threats that we faced, misinformation and disinformation. And I just thought irony just died there. But of course, she knew that. She knew that. This is the point. They taunt us because they know we see them, But I think, look, the best thing we can do is ultimately knowledge is power. And that's why everybody watching this or everyone listening to this, do make sure you check out Niall's new book. We'll just bring it back on screen again, because honestly, the more information we have and the more we understand, and I love the fact that your approach to this is so sort of bullseye to me. You're cutting to the chase, because you could go into scientific charts and other people do that, Niall, but I think this is, well, it's every bit as important, if not more important, because it is the awful realization of what they're about. But with that knowledge, hopefully gives it enrages us further. It powers us up. We know more stuff, and certainly I find in life that the more information you have, the more you can help wake up some of these other normies. So
absolutely, and I don't really like to use the word awake, because it sounds like an end point, and none of us are at that end point.
No.
We're all on a journey.
We are,
and I think that for many people reading this book, I'd hope that I'll help them along the way in their journey. But I'm somewhere on that journey too, and perhaps if I were to look at this book in 5 years' time, I might think, oh, I was probably a bit naive then. But most people, I would say 95% of readers of this book will think, God, that's a bit high octane, isn't it?
You cannot be high octane enough. Niall, our time has come to an end. Can I thank you? It's great to have you back on the show, and you'll have to come back again as well. I think that's been fantastic. I can see all the comments, people loving the conversation. People do appreciate the work and all the effort that goes into doing this. It's admirable. So look, thank you very much for being with us tonight, Niall. And as I said, the book is available now. Oh, I was going to say all good bookshops, but probably better go and get it from the here we go, Green in Tooth and Claw. So yeah, Misanthropic Mission of Climate Alarm. Yeah, it's almost the psychopathic mission of Climate Alarm, isn't it, when you think about some of these people? But
it is it's very dystopian. But yeah, David, I hope to meet you in person in March, then, isn't it, at your free speech?
Yeah, first of March in London, good old London town, and we're going to talk about free speech. It's kind of a continuation of this topic, and actually, I'll tell you something, Nick. The reason I wanted to start doing these events. We did one in December with Carl Benjamin and Andrew Bridgen, and now we've got Calvin and Lawrence, and we'll have other ones. I'd love to, for example, do a live event on the sort of issues that we've talked about today, because these are all so crucial. But I think that if there's one thing I learned during the COVID sort of lockdown, the separation of humanity, which they loved, it encouraged me even more to try and bring people together, actually in a space, real people in a real space. There was a real buzz after the one in December. There'll be a bigger buzz after this one in March. So I look forward to seeing you there. You'll be very welcome. And as I say, everyone else, thanks for all your kind comments. I see them on the different streams. Thank you very much for being here tonight. Back tomorrow night with Naomi Wolf. Another Dr. Naomi Wolf joins me 9 o'clock tomorrow night. We're going to talk about Disease X. Yes, Niall, Disease X. That sounds totally credible. Yeah, that sounds credible to me. So join it a wee bit later than because of Naomi's time difference thing. 9 o'clock tomorrow night. See you folks then. Thank you very much, Niall. Thank you very much, everyone. Catch you tomorrow. Bye-bye.